the General Welfare Clause being one, the Commerce Clause being another, all of which were subject and have been, in fact, rendered so elastic, it's like a stick of gum, a well-wadded piece of chewing gum, which stretches from the handle of your front door all the way out to the post box out in front of your street. My name is David Tulis, and we have with us on the phone Scott Landreth, who is a spokesman for the 10th Amendment Center. The 10th Amendment Center is a terrific effort for local economy and the free market. Scott Landreth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, there's something going on in Kentucky that we want to hear a little bit about. There's a clerk named Kim Davis who's, I think she's in federal court right now, from refusing to unite two Jim Joes in marriage. And she is citing several reasons. One is her personal Christian conscience, but also she is standing on the Kentucky Constitution, which forbids any recognition of poofter unions. How is what she is doing reflective of the spirit of the 10th Amendment? How is it that what she's doing really reflects the interest of my listener? Scott
I would tell your listener that one of the things that I think she should mention in her defense isn't just that it's a First Amendment issue, but really it's a 10th Amendment issue. I think a lot of people, when it comes to these types of issues, they start from the wrong premise and they don't ask the right question right out of the gate. And that question to me should be, does the federal government have the authority? Were they given an enumerated power in the Constitution to define or dictate marriage? And the question is so easy to answer. It's an absolutely no. The federal government does not have that authority. And according to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, any authority that the federal government was not given via the Constitution is the authority of the states.
Well, what then? How would she make her case? She's refusing under her state's law and under her oath of office, and also premised on her Christian convictions. She's refusing to unite a couple of poofters in marriage, and she should say, well, the 10th Amendment allows the state's discretion over marriage. You're saying?
Well, absolutely. Because basically the 10th Amendment says that anything that isn't given as a power or an authority to the federal government is reserved to the states. I mean, it couldn't be any more clear. And not only is the federal government not given that authority, but her state constitution, much like the state constitution in Ohio where I live, expressly prohibits same-sex marriage. So she is basically honoring both the U.S. Constitution as well as her state of Kentucky Constitution by refusing to comply with an unconstitutional act.
Well, I think it's important for her, Scott Landreth of the 10th Amendment Center, to point out that she's acting in good faith. If your actions in office are based on a law, then there really can't be bad faith. There can't be animus. There can't be hatred or bigotry. If those adjectives are thrown against her, they really seem to be really erroneous, because she's standing on law. She's acting in good faith. If the law is wrong, if the law is bigoted, well, she should say, or she is saying, let the legislature change it. But I'm not going to yield my authority in my office to an outside power.
I agree. Yeah, and let's think about all the things over the history of mankind that have been legal but immoral. I mean, slavery in the United States was perfectly legal, but it wasn't moral. So would someone who refused to return a fugitive slave to their slave master, would that person be a bad person? Would they be violating their moral conscience? Yeah, they'd be violating a law, but they'd be doing the right thing. Everything that Hitler did in Nazi Germany was legal, but it certainly wasn't right or moral.
Well, where does this idea come from that a lesser authority can resist a greater authority? Were there writers in American history who espoused this view that the 10th Amendment Center is guarding?
Absolutely, and I would say the two most prominent and well-known founders would be James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Virginia and Kentucky Resolutions of 1798. And basically, those resolutions were basically a call to action. The federal government, under President John, and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, through these resolutions, were trying to get other states to stand with Virginia and Kentucky in resisting this usurpation of power. Unfortunately, Most states didn't listen to them. They ignored them. Some states even came out expressly against those resolutions and said that, federal government can do whatever they want because the Constitution says all federal laws are supreme, which is nonsense, by the way. The federal government, the federal Constitution says that laws passed in pursuance of the Constitution stand supreme. So it would stand to reason that laws passed that are not pursuant to the Constitution are not supreme. So James Madison, oftentimes known as the father of the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson, the man who penned the Declaration of Independence, were totally against federal usurpations, totally against centralization of power, and wrote those resolutions basically saying if states have the authority to say no because it's the states, after all, that created the federal government. Some people think that the Constitution is a contract between the federal government and the states, but that's not what it is at all. It's basically a contract between the states, and it created the federal government.
So let's back up just for a second, Scott Landreth. We're talking with Scott Landreth of the 10th Amendment Center, and this is David Tulis. And you're saying, Scott, that the Constitution is not a compact among the states on one side and the federal government on another. Rather, it is a compact among the states. Is that what you say? Explain that.
Yeah, that is exactly correct. Well, basically, the Constitution created what we now know as the United States federal government, and it also defined its powers. When you look at the document itself, that's really all it is. They're creating a federal government. They're giving that federal government certain enumerated powers or authority, and that's really what it is. And they're also reaffirming some rights that folks have, just to make sure, and the idea was, let's make sure that the federal government doesn't grow too large and too strong, that they start taking away our natural rights. So, and people who think that it's a contract between the feds and the states, I would just ask, okay, we know who signed the Constitution on behalf of the states. Signed it on behalf of the federal government? And the answer is no one.
No one. That's right. So the federal government is a creation of the states. Well, Scott Landreth of the 10th Amendment Center, let me ask you this. How can my listener think that what you're saying has any relevance today? We've gone through the war on drugs. We've gone through the Vietnam War. We've gone through the rise of the modern surveillance state, the kind of total warfare and welfare state, World War II, which had income taxes passing 100%, the total mechanization of the American economy. We had the war between the states, or better known as the War to Prevent Southern Independence, all of which worked against constitutional liberties and sort of made dead letter the 10th Amendment. Is the 10th Amendment, how is the 10th Amendment alive in spite of all these setbacks, all these effective erasures of that power reserved to the states and the people?
Yeah, I mean, there's still hope. I mean, you're exactly right. Ever since the war between the states, the 10th Amendment and the Constitution itself has been eroded day after day after day. The might makes right mentality seems to rule the day today, but fortunately, there's a lot of liberty-minded state legislators throughout the country that are trying to kind of reignite the 10th Amendment. They're trying to pass state laws that define marriage. They're trying to pass state laws that basically lift the prohibition on marijuana. They're trying to pass state laws that put the federal government back in its place, back in its box when it comes to gun laws and surveillance. Like you said, Fourth Amendment issues. There's a lot of right to try legislation being introduced throughout the country. This is legislation that gives terminally ill patients the right to try non-FDA approved medications, including cannabis, to try to prolong and put them in a better state of life. And so there are legislators that are working to do this. Unfortunately, we've got our work cut out for us because federal supremacy seems to be an epidemic in our country. So many people, attorneys in particular, just seem to think that whatever the federal government says, we have to do because the federal government is supreme. So we really need to turn that on its head and get people to realize that we do have the power to say no. We don't have to help the federal government implement and enforce unconstitutional federal acts. And if we can do that, we can make a difference, like Rosa Parks made a difference. Martin Luther King made a difference. And these people made a difference by saying no and refusing to comply.
Now, when we talk about the 10th Amendment as an ideal, Scott Landreth, we seem to be talking sort of theoretically, but really, as the 10th Amendment paper of there's a white paper that the Senate produced last year that kind of did a survey, and it points out that because the states are so sort of rounded up, they're corralled into doing so much for the federal government that they really have huge leverage. It's not that the federal government runs everything in the states. The picture is more accurately described this way: that the federal government makes a program and then tells the states to bring it about. And so states have really a kind of a stranglehold on federal programs if the governments of those states would just say, okay, on this point, we're going to say no, because so much is done by states. Talk a little bit about that, the service states provide to the federal government and the leverage that potentially it gives residents in those states.
Yeah, and even Judge Andrew Napolitano has said this before on Fox News. The federal government really they don't have the resources to implement and enforce all of their so-called laws. They need help from state and local governments, county sheriffs, local police, to implement and enforce all of these federal laws that they're passing. If the states would simply refuse to comply, again, the federal government doesn't have the resources to do it on their own. They really need the states. So they usually bribe the states. They give them federal grant money, which obviously is taxpayer money taken from you and me and your listener, and they basically bribe the states. And oftentimes when we, for example, federal gun laws, state legislators all across the country, maybe in 20 or so states this past year, 2015, introduced bills, I should say, that would have basically said, we as a state are no longer going to help the federal government enforce, federal gun laws. And unfortunately, the biggest opponent to the legislation in many cases was state and local law enforcement. Not because they necessarily disagree in theory, but because they get a lot of federal funds and a lot of cool toys, a lot of, armored vehicles and cool guns, and they don't want to stop that. They want to keep that spigot on. So they came out against these bills, and subsequently, all but one of those bills died.
Well, it sounds like the 10th Amendment has an interest in the English vocabulary. There's a word with two letters. One of the letters is a consonant, and the other letter is a vowel. And maybe you could talk about what that word means, how my listener should maybe practice using it in his own affairs, in dealings with the state, and how maybe states, if they are willing to maybe go a little bit more on their own, can use that word vis-a-vis the federal government.
Yeah, absolutely. And the word you're referring to is a pretty easy one. Like you said, it's two letters, and that word is no. It is simply to say no. Much like Rosa Parks said no when she was told to move it to the back of the bus. And she made a huge impact on our society. I don't know about you, but I have 0 schools, museums, libraries, and streets named after me, but Rosa Parks has probably hundreds. And she just used that one simple word. She said no. She was tired of saying yes all the time. She was tired of complying to unconstitutional and immoral laws, and so she said no. And we can do that in the states. In fact, the Supreme Court, not that we need their permission, but the Supreme Court even agrees that the states can say no. They have it's called the anti-commandeering doctrine, and it basically dates back all the way to 1842, but that same doctrine was used as recently in 2012. And basically the Supreme Court has ruled very consistently over the 150 plus years that the federal government cannot compel or force the states to help them implement or enforce federal laws.
Well, I mentioned. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Scott Landreth. Go ahead.
They can stand down. They don't have to help. And if states would just realize that, they do have the power to say no. Even the Supreme Court, which of course is a branch of the federal government, has basically even affirmed that the states have the authority to say no. If the federal government wants to pass a law, they can do so. We can't stop them. But there's nothing that says we have to help them implement and enforce that law. When the states do that, they're complicit. They're just as bad as the federal bureaucrats who passed the law to begin with, because they're going along.
So it sounds like what you're saying, Scott Landreth, is that we, my listener and I, and maybe even you, we deserve what we get because we're not standing on principle, and because we personally don't stand on principle, our local governments don't, our state governments don't, and in the end, everything is decided by people far, far away in Washington who are supposed to operate on a basis of law in which their powers are enumerated. And yet, as we know from many abuses in history, in our very short history as a country. This government creates powers on its own and cares not about negative results or negative feedback. So the word no is something that we should practice. Let me ask you this, Scott. I know your expertise is in the area of this political and legal concept of the 10th Amendment, which reserves rights to the states and the people. But what about down here in the streets of Chattanooga and Hamilton County? Is there any way that the 10th Amendment ideal, which talks about unenumerated rights, is there any way to practically live that out or make use of that concept with a sense of hope in one's heart?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, and I think that exercising, if you will, the 10th Amendment has proven successful over the last 150 plus years. Jury nullification is a big thing. Sometimes people don't realize, but if they're called to serve on a jury, for example, and you believe that the law that the accused has broken is unjust or immoral or unconstitutional law, you can simply vote to acquit or say, you know what, I'm not going to vote I'm not going to vote to put this person in prison for a law that I believe is immoral or unconstitutional. It's called jury nullification. Folks have been making a difference and exercising the 10th Amendment. In the 1920s and 30s, alcohol became illegal. You could no longer produce alcohol due to prohibition, the 18th Amendment. And a few years later, that law was repealed. That amendment was repealed via the 21st Amendment because people were not complying with the law. There was a speakeasy on every street corner. It was like Walgreens or CVS. So people can make a difference at the local level, but they need to focus at the state and local level and stop trying to worry about who the next president is going to be or who they're going to put on the Supreme Court. Because if you think about it, if the states would simply stand up to the federal government would almost become powerless. Because again, they don't have, and the federal government even admits this, they don't have the resources to enforce all of their silly laws without help from the states. So if the states would stop towing the line and simply draw a line in the sand, that can make a huge impact. And it's up to we, the people, to focus at our state and local level, call our state representatives, call our state senators, and make sure you tell your friends and neighbors and coworkers to do the same. Because the more, there's strength in numbers.
The 10th Amendment,
more of us that are doing that, the more of a difference we'll make.
The 10th Amendment Center in its white paper, Scott Landreth points out that it's in the heart of individual people where what it calls a revolution takes place. I would say it does start in the heart of the people, but I would say that the nomenclature of revolution is really not quite right. There has been a revolution, but it's really that of the national government, that of the federal government. There is a revolution taking place continually within its offices. And so what we have to have here in Chattanooga, where my listener is and where I am, is a kind of a counter-revolution. It's really against revolution. And I would suggest the argument be liberty-oriented local economy, where people really live out the ideals of the free market and being a free people under constitutional government. If they live that way, they can actually, over time, attain it bit by bit. Well, listen.
It's going to be incremental.
Incremental, that's right. Well, Scott Landreth, thanks so much for chatting with me and my listener.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Scott Landreth is a representative of the 10th Amendment Center.com.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Costa, host of the Costa Report, every Sunday at 9 a.m. If there's one person we can turn to explore the role debate moderators and members of the press play in shaping elections, it's legendary news anchor Jim Lehrer. Don't miss my guest Jim Lehrer this Sunday at 9 a.m. in the Costa Report, right here on AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio.
After some morning clouds, expect lots of afternoon sunshine for your Thursday. Getting hot, highs 90 to 92. Tonight, lows 68 to 71. Another mainly dry and hot day. Friday, partly cloudy, highs up around 90 with a few widely scattered afternoon showers and storms. Saturday. Check out Taco Bell's delicious new Captain Crunch Delights. Captain Crunch Crunch Berries on the outside, frosty milky icing on the inside. Captain Crunch Delights for a limited time only at Taco Bell. And I'm WDEF News 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Orr on AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio.
When my brother and I opened the first Jets Pizza, we believed if we made the best pizza, customers would find us. So we made fresh dough each day, used fresh toppings, and premium mozzarella cheese. 300 plus stores later, we still do.
Try Jet's famous 8-corner pizza with premium mozzarella cheese and one topping, now just $11.99 for a limited time only. Jet's Pizza, the best pizza in town. 3600 Hickson Pike.
Life is short. Eat better pizza.
Let's get Jets.
Do you feel better outside your home or business than in? Indoor air quality is important. Mildew, mold, smoke, water, and rodent damage are prime causes of poor indoor air quality. Ducts, Indoor Air Professionals, better known as Duct Busters, cleans HVA systems using 127 definable Duct Busters steps. Let Mark Thompson address the indoor air quality at your business to help reduce employee illnesses. Prevent fires by cleaning your dryer vents. Mark and his parents, Dick and Joan Thompson, have been building our local economy and helping local people with HVAC systems 16 years. Ducts, Indoor Air Professionals. Call 876-9907. 876-9907. Ducks. Call now.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection, loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Here comes Dale Earnhardt Jr. He's got third. He's going for second. Earnhardt going for the lead.
The NASCAR Sprint Cup Series is on the Motor Racing Network.
Fox News Talk 1240.
Hear it live on the Motor Racing Network, the voice of NASCAR.
Check it out live on Chattanooga's official NASCAR radio station.
Fox News Talk 1240.
This is America Now with Meghan McCain.
Al Gore running is crazy. You're flying around in your private jet all over the world, and you want average Americans to care about the environment. Don't you think you should be doing your part as well?
Meghan McCain, weekdays at 7 p.m.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Fox News Talk 1240.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Boo. The Kentucky clerk who refuses to grant marriage licenses to same-sex couples called to court.
Rowland County Clerk Kim Davis is scheduled to appear before a judge who may find her in contempt. Gay couples are pushing the court to impose fines against Davis for failing to do her job while collecting a state salary. She's been under pressure to resign, which is the only way she can leave her office. Davis is elected, so she cannot be fired.
Fox Radio's Gernal Scott. The community of Fox Lake in Illinois remembering the slain police lieutenant Charles Glenowitz rallying around his widow.
He was the most wonderful, caring, and loving father to our boys.
Meanwhile, the hunt for killers continues with officers going door to door. And Oklahoma bombing co-conspirator Terry Nichols wants his guns now in the possession of the FBI to be turned over to his ex-wife because he owes child support. Fox News, we report, you decide.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Fox News Talk 1240.
Live from Chattanooga, Tennessee, it's Nooganomics with David Tulis.
There's an outlier possibility that there will be warfare ahead, just as there was warfare in Tennessee in the 1860s when the Yankees tried to keep the southern states in the Union after their governments had voted themselves out, exercising their constitutional liberties. There was warfare in Tennessee, and we have some great Southern heroes to thank for a favorable resistance, including Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a terrific warrior and a man who was all about racial reconciliation, and whose slaves fought with him, all except for one agreed to fight with him and serve him as a cavalry officer. The war that could be ahead is between three parts, and here I'm talking here about military conflict, right? Muzzle flashes, the sound of guns, smoke rolling over the hills in the neighboring part of town. That's what I'm talking about. And the conflict is not necessarily in view today, and it certainly is beyond probably the lifetime of Sheriff Jim Hammond, who is in his presentation Monday at a Republican club bringing up the idea of an existential conflict. And Sheriff Hammond is taking a bold stand to describe Islam from the inside. And the reason it's bold is because the geese that are squawking at him for disturbing their tranquility, they are people who pretend not to know what's in the Quran, or who've never read really what the substance of, or you might say the substance abuse in Islam is. And the substance is that it is a totalitarian system. It is, as Chief Hammond famously has been saying this week, it is essentially communism without God. It is a totalitarian life system. It is political through and through, but it's not atheistic, right? In its gloss of ultimate cause and ultimate responsibility. The gloss in Islam is not the people, the worker, the collective, which is, of course, is the Marxist paradigm. It is Allah, the God posited that was created in the genius of this businessman and eventual military man, Muhammad of Mecca. And this prophet has a system of law and government which is total in its scope, making him in conflict with Christianity, which also has a total world and life view. Though most Christians, I would say around here, don't think that that's true. They think that Christianity just applies to the individual somehow, that they have a very individualistic use of Christianity. And you can tell that that's true if you my listener, who are not a practicing Christian. I understand that, but just listen to Christian radio for a while, and you'll hear that much of the sermons that are given, the analysis that's given, is all about personal piety. It's all about the individual and the individual's struggles against temptation and against sin and against trouble and so on. It's all about the individual. There's no sense, except perhaps on Janet Parshall's show, which is a kind of a marketplace show in the late afternoon. Except there, Christian radio tends to be very pietistic. In other words, self-centered. You could say even omphalocentric, which means your omphalos is your navel. So omphalocentric is a view in which all you're looking at is your own navel, or the lint collected in your navel. The warfare ahead is between Sharia versus the U.S. versus, you could say, patriot, gun lover, independence-minded, constitutional type people. Now, rightly so, the national government views Christianity as a threat. Why is that? Well, because believe it or not, Christianity is all about liberty and independence. It's all about self-determination. It's really all about government. Christianity is an extraordinarily pro-government system of worship, belief, practice, life, and even, well, of capitalism. Capitalism comes out of Christianity, and so does the whole idea of God's grace. Grace is what wins in Christianity. Warfare is what wins in Islam. And slavery is part of. I salivate at how juicy this story has become, because the ACLU, Hetty Weinberg, the feminist attorney in Nashville, she now is on the side of a system of life and law that envisions sexual slavery. I think that is just I think God is just laughing. God is laughing at his enemies, because here you have two enemies, right? You have the ACLU and Hetty Weinberg joining sides with Sharia. And Sharia and jihad, which is warfare by Sharia in terms of Sharia. Jihad envisions the sexual slave and the slave market. Do a Google image search on Muslim slavery, and you'll find from the 1900s many very, very lovely, kind of luscious paintings of slave markets. And guess what the most attractive, the highest priced slave is? Muhammad's most valuable slave was his love harem number one, a woman, a Coptic Christian named Mary, whom he impregnated by sheer handsomeness. Right, Muhammad impregnated Mary the Coptic Christian who was his slave, and she gave birth to at least one son, according to one book that recites the slavery angle in the Muslim religion. So I think it's just delicious that the American Civil Liberties Union and Reverend Merritt here in Chattanooga, the Presbyterian. I'm a Presbyterian, and here my fellow believer in divided government, Reverend Merritt, is very upset that Jim Hammond, the sheriff, our elected sheriff, is warning that the slave states of the Mideast are just templates for the slave states of North America that could be coming. They could be coming. But of course, Americans, you my listener, perhaps exempted, Americans are not really aware of this system. They're not. They have a very short-term perspective, right? They watch TV news, and so the common person has a perspective that's very short-term, very kind of pleasure-oriented, not building much. And so most people, even practicing Christians who you think have eternity in their perspective, even they have a very kind of short-term view of their lives as Christians. But the warfare will, I think, be bloody, because in the end, the war against the West, the war against Christianity, has to take military form, and to resist it, there's only so far that a good sermon will go. And Pamela Geller, the very courageous activist against the Islamic tide, she points out the violence with which the Muslim cause is advanced. It's always advanced best with violence, by jocose arguments, by business transactions, by friendship. These are all ways, of course, in which it advances, by occasional conversions, especially in American prisons. American prisons, Tennessee prisons, penitentiaries, are very, very valuable for the cause of Muhammad. But the war ahead, if there is to be one, is among three parties: Sharia, the United States government, and gun-loving patriots such as you, right? Freedom-oriented, small business-minded, quasi-Christian people like you, my listener, right? You're not, like I say, I understand you're not a practicing Christian, but you are sympathetic with Christianity. And so you're identified in terms of Sharia with the Christian liberty argument. And that makes you a target of two things: the Sharia theory and the American NSA, we've got you covered theory. And the warfare is certainly going to be bloody if it happens here. In the time of the Crusades, according to Bill Warner, a very interesting video that he has on YouTube, about a 2-minute job, there is a map that runs through a couple of centuries of time, and there are recorded about 548 battles, if I'm remembering correctly, by Turks, by Moors against Christendom, and about 20 battles where the Christians are the moving party, right? Where the Christians attack the enclave or the columns of the advancing Muslim armies. It's not really at that point a war of religions; it's a war of political systems, and that is what Dr. Warner does. He's very scrupulous to say he has nothing to say about Islam as a religion. His work is entirely in Nashville at the Center for the Study of Political Islam, entirely on the political, economic, and military paradigm, the military method, if you will, the methodology, if you will. Well, there's a story I wanted to mention about Tennessee's open records law. I've got some open records requests going. I need to do more of them. And one of them, I need to find out more about our stratospheric aerosol geoengineering program over Tennessee. We've had two bad days. 2 days ago and yesterday, heavily sky-striped by jet traffic, which days before, nothing like that days before. And last week was remarkable. Blue skies, a vast blue prism. And one day with just remarkable skies that were, you might say, from the hand of God, not from the coagulation, from the intervention of jets and federal programs. I need to find out more about that by open records request. Now, there is it's under the Tennessee Public Records Act, if we read a little bit about this from Deborah Fisher. And there's an effort being made to change your access to public data and my access to public data. There'll be some meetings across the state in October that will allow people like you and me to voice our opposition. The Tennessee Coalition for Open Government believes that charging citizens to view public records would make it easier for some government officials to block our access to records. Deborah Fisher says, we believe that the result of a change in Tennessee's law would be immediate. Some citizens would no longer be able to view public records because they could not afford to pay the fees. And the change proposed would roll back our legal traditions of open government, and it would create an exemption in the Public Records Act. And again, it'd be kind of a poll tax, she says. She says our great state of Tennessee would have the equivalent of a poll tax for public records, opening the door for arbitrary charges that would be nearly impossible to challenge. We know the result of that kind of system, and I think we just need to be aware of that story. That's something that's developing, and we need to say that, well, no, we need to have open records. And I've got one going on now with the Department of Safety. I'm trying to discover irregularities in the exercise, the operation of the administrative driver's license machinery. I have a report that there has been illicit activity on the part of the department, and I believe the response is overdue. The state has, I think, 11 days with which to respond. I did have a couple of modifications of my request, and that they extended restarted the toll of the time, but I think that period has now passed as well. And so I probably need to get on that and find out from the Department of Safety Legal Division what the holdup is, because I have a statutory right to this information on a program that I describe as irregular. So we want to get the Commissioner of Safety and Homeland Security involved in that, and my address is to him. What is going on in our county and in a couple of neighboring, well, not neighboring, but East Tennessee counties, where there seem to be irregularities attempting to harass a citizen who might be a man exercising his freedom. Herb Titus is an important attorney and has written several books. I subscribed to his newsletter for a couple of years, and he is writing at westernjournalism.com about Kim Davis in Kentucky. And he says that she has every right to say no to poofter unions based on the Kentucky Constitutional Amendment 1 that was passed by 75% of the voters in 2004. And it says only a marriage between one man and one woman shall be valid or recognized as a marriage in Kentucky. A legal status identical or substantially similar to that of marriage for unmarried individuals shall not be valid or recognized. So Mrs. Davis is standing on she's standing on several grounds. I think she's offering as her first defense the weakest of them, and that is her personal conscience. I think it doesn't matter what your personal beliefs are about poofter unions. Whether you're for them or against them is irrelevant. If you hold office, you have a ministerial duty, and hers is not, as the press is saying, to obey the law. Her duty really is to obey the law. Now, when I say that, what I mean is obey the law that's written down. Court opinions are not law; they are simply opinions, and she's not separated from the claim of her oath upon her by the opinion of the majority in Washington that's called Obergefell versus Hodges. Titus goes on to say, must Clerk Davis conform her practices as clerk to those of a lawless Supreme Court and a capitulated governor? Surely not. She cannot turn back now. And this woman is in court, I believe, now as we speak. Having stated that her behavior is constrained by her understanding of God's law, any retreat would do damage to the name and reputation of the Lord. Here's a constitutional attorney speaking, right? She could resign, but resignation would be the equivalent to admitting that in the wake of the Supreme Court's folly, no Bible-believing Christian or Jew can serve in public office in America. Efforts are already beginning to use that Clerk Davis is constrained by her civic duty, right? So she's doing her duty to say no. She's not disobeying her duty. Her duty is funneled upon her through her oath, right? It flows from the law, the body of statutes in Kentucky, through her oath, that includes the Constitution, through her oath to her. She is bound. In other words, she's put her hands. Hang on. Caller, you're on the air. What's your note or question?
great subject, David. I know Herb Titus, and sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. He's wrong in this instance because, and listen, I'm for her. Thank God for the elected official, and let's get rid of the bureaucrats. But the fact is, this is an equal protection clause issue, and the Supreme Court ruled correctly. It would be no different than if, how are the states supposed to address this if marriage is legal in New York but not in Tennessee? If, as Tennessee passed the law that a driver's license is only valid for white males in Tennessee, and the black male passes through from New York, they're not going to, or if they pass a law saying that only Tennessee residents are allowed to drive through Tennessee that are licensed. The problem is the license and the equal protection clause. Everyone is missing this. However, I agree she should stand up because she took an oath, and I believe she does not have to issue that license, not because of any law, but because of her faith and her belief. But if one's going to argue this legally, the Supreme Court made the right decision. That's my take on it. Thanks.
Well, the Supreme Court did not make the right decision because it had argued in the DOMA case a couple years earlier that the Defense of Marriage Act had to go, that certain provisions of that law had to go because they pinched the consciences of the state. It was a states' rights decision, and it said that states have the authority to regulate marriage. I would contend that states shouldn't regulate marriage at all. It is a constitutional right to marry, and therefore does not need regulation, does not need any system of permissions, especially, though there could be perhaps a system of recording marriages. States have abused my listeners' constitutional right to marry and set up these regimes. Now, having done so, the question is, can a state such as Tennessee be ordered by the federal court on the matter of marriage? In other words, is there subject matter jurisdiction through any amendment at all, the 14th or other? I would say no, there is no state jurisdiction over marriage. And so Obergefell is a decision without a cause, right? It makes an argument without being able to land anywhere. I think as far as Tennessee goes, it goes right over our heads. It has nothing to do with us. It should just like a stray bullet pass over your head and land in an embankment 100 feet away from you with a spray of dust. Obergefell does not land here, and it doesn't land here because marriage is not in the purview, it's not in the authority's scope of the national government. It's a state issue. Now, again, state issue, it shouldn't be a state issue at all. There should not be a Tennessee marriage statute at all that licenses marriage. But we do have one. Therefore, I would say it should be biblical, reflecting God's created order. And then it should be defended. It should be defended based on our constitutional structure of law and government. But the problem is we have lawyers. Lawyers are a bane of human existence. They are lawyers in the time of our Lord Jesus were those who loaded men with obligations and duties that they themselves would not deign to carry. We have the same problem here. We have people who believe that the legal reality is the only one, but it's not. Once you get your lawyer's advice, what you need to do as a businessman, my listener, is to say, okay, got your advice, but here's what I'm going to do. You protect me, okay? And therefore, the decision is not controlled by law and legal concepts. It's controlled by your human necessity, right? Your human duty. And the lawyer's task is to reduce the risk. That's all he's there to do, reduce the risk. You might get sued, but if you're doing something that's right, maybe a lawsuit is just part of it. Maybe litigation is just part of what you have to do to accomplish some high goal or some great purpose. You just have to go ahead and hope for the best. You can't let lawyers control. That's why lawyers in the legislature are very damaging. I'd say that lawyers should not be in the legislature, and they really should be. I think my understanding of the Tennessee Constitution is that they're not allowed in office. Well, you say, why? Well, that's because they are officers of the court. What is the court? Well, the court is the third department. We have the executive department now filled by Bill Haslam, the governor. We have the legislative department held by Senator so-and-so and Representative so-and-so here in the Chattanooga area. And then you have the court. The court is the third branch. It is the interpretive branch, the branch that advises departments on how to run their departments, their agencies, and serve the people within the law. That's what and to decide disputes among the people, right? In civil cases. A lawyer representing the court and an officer of the court can't possibly rightly serve in the legislature. He just can't, because what he'll do is he'll bring into the state's governing idea and its ideals his conception of law, which is, again, the law controls. No, law doesn't control. In fact, you say politics controls. Some decisions are legally questionable. Maybe they're legally suspect, but look how often it happens already that laws are passed, people are elected based on illegal positions, right? Unconstitutional positions. Think about Bernie Sanders. He's a man whose whole agenda is wrapped in unconstitutional theory, democratic progressive theory. He has no connection with the Constitution at all. And yet there he is. He's in office, and so we know already that the law and legal conceptions don't control. But here now, in the Kim Davis situation in Kentucky, the law is said to control. The Supreme Court decision is law. Well, no, it's not law. It's just opinion, and it goes right over the heads of all Kentuckians and lands in a dirt bank across the border. Doesn't affect Kentucky at all. And Kim Davis is one of the few people to stand her ground. Would that Bill Knowles here in Chattanooga, a man who pretends to have a Christian conviction, pretends to have a Christian testimony, does he not serve a God who stands with his people, who stands with his courageous men, exercising Christian courage? Well, there was no Christian courage in his heart. His Christianity, his Christian witness, if you will, his Christian testimony in his mind is exhibited by his compliance, right? I've just got to do what the law says. I've just got to follow the law. I've got to obey. That's in his mind, though it pained him greatly in his soul. That was Christian courage. Christian courage was compliance. Well, I wonder if that's the end of it. I wonder if that's really an action or an inaction we should take as advice. I would say maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't take Bill Knowles as the example. Maybe we should take instead Kim Davis in Kentucky, in Rowan County, as the example. She is saying no. And the 10th Amendment, the whole thing we heard a moment ago from Scott Landreth of the 10th Amendment Center, saying no. It's two letters. One is a consonant and one is a vowel. If you get them in the right order, you're saying something. If you get them in reverse order, you've got the word on. Well, most people have it backwards. They're saying on. On we go. Let's just continue. Let's reverse the order and have the correct word. And the word is no. Let's say no. Let's stand our ground. Now, marketplace is people standing their ground in service of others. Sometimes, though, we are drawn into conflict, and that would be against the Muslim theory of slavery, sexual slavery. Where are those Boko Haram girls? How many former virgins have been penetrated by the good AK-bearing soldiery of Boko Haram? Probably dozens. These girls are traded around, bought and sold. They're worn out with sex. They're abused women. And the ACLU and Hetty Weinberg, they're saying, we have nothing to fear.
After some morning clouds, expect lots of afternoon sunshine for your Thursday. Getting hot, highs 90 to 92. Tonight, lows 68 to 71. Another